Hi, this is Terry Glaze, and you're listening to Drag the Waters
with Joshua.
All right, guys, it is now time to drag the water some more here on the CMSPN.com, the CMSPN Podcast Network, and we are with the great Terry Date. How are you doing, Terry?
I'm doing good. That's a good introduction. Great. I like that.
Anyone watching or listening right now, if you own any CDs from any of your favorite bands, Terry Date's name is on it.
I didn't work on it. I just put my name on it, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you go back all the way to some of my earliest favorite stuff as being Metal Church and all the way onto the new Deftones album. So you've been a staple in my CD collection.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, working with friends is an easy job.
Right. I guess just a quick, do some housekeeping here on this one. What got you into producing, and what got you into that side of the music business?
I started out as an engineer, so producing wasn't the first thing. I was just friends. All my friends played instruments, and I didn't have the temperament for it. So I'd be hanging out, and I wanted to do something constructive. So I'd turn knobs, and I just sort of took it from there.
Now you've got a kind of a style of I don't think there's a Terry Date sound. You go into a band and you make them sound the best that they can. What is that in you that makes you do that and not just, this is Terry Date sound and you're going to sound like how I'm going to make you sound?
To me, it's always an honor when somebody asks you to work with them to make their record, to get their music out to the public. I don't feel like it's my job to, if somebody wanted to buy my record, then it would be a different story, but they're buying the band's record. I've always been a fan of music more than a musician. So I always listen to the music as a fan, as a non-musician would listen to it, as an audience member would listen to it. So by doing that, it's my job, I feel, to make sure that I'm transparent and the band is coming through without anybody interrupting their creativity.
And onto the Pantera side of your stuff, the latest thing that you've done with the band would be going in and remixing, remastering, Reinventing the Steel. And it sounds amazing, by the way. Everybody that I've talked to that's listened to it, you brought it up a notch to where it was. So, going into that, what do you do to really dive into it? I mean, did you get the tapes and the files and just, break them down, or how did you go about doing that?
Well, first of all, Sterling Winfield did a great job. He's a great friend of mine, and he did an amazing job with the band. As you probably know, I couldn't keep up with the band for one more record. That's why I had to go. But I was in contact with them throughout the record. Sterling did a great job with the tracking of it. I knew what the band, I mean, doing 4 records with a band. Oh, yeah. I knew what they wanted, even though they weren't there, and what I didn't get right, Rex or Phil or Sterling would let me know what they felt I could do better. So it was kind of, well, it was extremely bittersweet, actually, to sit down and listen to. I got the files on Pro Tools sent to me, and to sit down and listen to those tracks, hearing Dime's guitar after all those years, and stuff that I wasn't involved with. It was hard, to get going on it, to tell you the truth. But once I did, it was just brought back great memories. So it was good, just good Pantera music.
Was there anything in the files that you found that you maybe didn't hear the first time around when you heard Reinventing the Steel?
Well, there's always things you don't necessarily, things get tucked in a lot. So there's little things here and there, but No, the big picture was there. So there was no big surprises really.
And, you know, going back to starting your career with Pantera, not your actual career, but, you know, starting working with the guys in Pantera, going back to those days, had you heard of the band prior to, you know, getting asked to produce? Obviously, you know, they were kind of big in the underground, but hadn't broke out yet.
Yeah, they were. I had not. My manager at the time, actually, he was recently my ex-manager, but still good friend, sent me a tape and said, these guys are really good. They're getting signed and, you know, you should check them out. So it was a cassette demo of Cowboys from Hell. And it was amazing. I didn't realize how amazing it was until years later, you know, how amazing the band was. But yeah, I hadn't heard from them, but as soon as I got that tape, I went down to Texas to meet them. And we just, you know, we got in a van, drove up to one of their shows up by the Oklahoma line, I think. And sitting in a van for an hour, you know, is how we got to know each other. And they needed to figure out if they could trust me, you know, for a long time. So it took that, you know, at the end of that day, we were good. I had a nickname and everything. So once I got a nickname, I knew I was in.
And what was that nickname?
Rope King.
There you go. You know, going into Cowboys from Hell, they had pretty much self-produced 4 albums prior to that. So going into working with them, could you tell that they knew what they were doing in the studio? Did that make it easier on you? Did it make it harder on you? You know, kind of a push and pull with them, kind of knowing what they were doing in the studio.
Well, you know, Vinny and Dime's dad was an engineer and had his own studio, so they grew up basically in the studio, so they knew what they were doing. But they hadn't, up to that point, they hadn't worked with anybody on a national level, I guess, you know, so everything they had done in the past was normal and right. But this was, I think they were wanting to see and validate that what they knew was right. And from the very beginning, me and Vinny worked side by side. He's a great engineer. We sat together getting those sounds. You know, it was not something that I did. It was something that me and Vinny started, and then the rest of the band, I think, you know, Dime would kick in, and then Rex would come in, and then Phil would have his say on things. And I was always referencing with each one of the band members influences, things that, you know, records that they liked for their instruments. So I was always trying to find out what they liked in other bands, and then I was trying to adapt that to what they did to their band.
Now, I know from my limited time in the studio, you would sit with somebody and I'm always picking someone's brain anyway. So when you first sit down with them during the Cowboys from Hell era, are they drilling you on, you know, what was it like working with Metal Church and Overkill and things like that?
Probably, but I can't think of any examples. I mean, one of the reasons I think they had me, they wanted to use me is they were fans of Soundgarden. So I'm sure that they were wanting to, you know, hear some stories there. But I don't remember exactly, you know, I mean, you've seen the videos. It was kind of a wild ride from the beginning. So it wasn't a lot of sitting down and contemplating things. It was pretty reactive the whole time.
As hard partying as they were, and as larger than life as they were, how were they in the studio? Were they focused and professional in the studio, and then were wild at other times, or was it just kind of wild at all times? And hopefully you got some good takes in there.
They were incredibly serious, but they were wild at all times. But I mean, it was completely deadly serious to them. But when things started getting too intense, when things started to get, you know, when the fun started leaving, somebody would call for a black tooth, and so we'd all stand in a circle and, you know, have a black tooth, and then everything was fun again, you know. And so there was, it it was a combination of everything. There was never a dull moment, but there was never any screwing around. Those guys were serious, about what they wanted to do.
And I think Dime definitely changed heavy metal guitar. Sitting there with this, with the Dean and the Randalls and all that. Working with other guitarists before that. What was your take on his sound?
The way I always work is, I wouldn't grab a guitar player and say, I like your guitar and your rig, but you should use mine, or you should use this. I always wanted, unless it was just a piece of crap, I wanted the guy. I mean, that's his sound. That's the stuff that he has pride in, like, developing that whole thing. So I never got in the way of the Randall or the Dean or anything, because that was his thing. We always attempted to try a tube amp, at least in the early days, and it never worked. He just liked the crunch of that Randall. And so really my job was not to change his sound. My job was to accurately reflect what he was hearing in front of his amp at low volumes in the control room. If I could give him that feel at a low volume in here, then when I turned it up, it would be even better. So that was the goal, try to get that.
And some of the vocal performances on Cowboys from Hell are out of this world. Cemetery Gates and Medicine Man. A lot of the second half stuff where Phil's just way out at the register. Kind of go back to kind of recording that. I mean, obviously Cemetery Gates, the incredible, where Dime's doing the squeal, and then Phil's mimicking it and stuff like that. I mean, that had to have been insane in the studio.
Yeah, and I wish I could remember exactly how that all went down. I mean, it's been a long time, and like I said, it was like those were Hunter S. Thompson years for me, back then we didn't have we weren't manipulating anything. So everything on those records, there were no samples, there was no auto tuning, there was no, nothing that we couldn't get out of a foot pedal or an piece of outboard gear, so there was no fancy finagling. So I can't remember. I don't remember if Phil did his vocal part and then Dime mimicked it, or vice versa. I can't remember that, but it was pretty earth shattering when he did it, because that's all Phil. I mean, that's not me manipulating tape or anything, so.
It's some amazing stuff. And you got to take those songs, and then you see like the rush of videos, and you're like, how does this happen? Where they're playing to 500,000 people, and these are those songs that you just worked on, just a few months prior, and domination to this day at that performance is a legendary performance, and all those songs coming together under your watch.
Yeah, it's it's a lot more. It's a lot more fun to look back after 20-25 years than right after it was released, because first of all, by the time I finish, any record really, but especially theirs, I need a break from all of it. I can't listen to it anymore. So I don't usually listen to any record that I do for a long time, 10 years maybe sometimes, because all the dirty laundry's there. I just hear everything that's wrong with it. I can't enjoy it like a first-time listener. But on top of that, as far as what happened to them, as far as them, well, they didn't blow up after Cowboys from Hell. That they did the typical kind of, you sell about 250,000 copies of the record on your first record if you're a good band, and then you triple that on your next record, and you just build your audience that way. So it took a little while, but I was in contact with them all the time. I'd see them whenever they were on tour and I was close by. But quite honestly, I was like busy as hell back then. So I'd finish that record and I'd be on to something else, and And then, you know, a year later I'd go back and do another record. And I mean, we were talking all the time, but I was like in the middle of, it, the thick of it back then. So,
oh yeah, you were definitely a hardworking producer at the time. So when they come back for Vulgar Display of Power, what was your first initial response to those songs coming to you? Like,
well, they just they wanted to be heavier. Phil especially, they wanted to be heavier than Cowboys. And typically what we did in the studio is those songs would get written in the studio, because we had their dad's studio, so it was sort of like it was like home recording is today back then. So they would come in, Dime would have a riff, or Vinny would have a drum part, or Rex would have something. Somebody would have a kernel of an idea, and it would quickly turn into a song. They would sort of grab the riff, decide what the second riff was going to be, what the chorus was going to be, intro, middle break, and we would shuffle it all around. What we would do is we would figure out the intro. I'd start tape rolling. We'd record a rough intro. Then they would figure, well, let's go to this riff here and decide how many times. And then I just punch in the whole band, so it was just like a rough punch in constructing the song to the end. All rough performances, kind of choppy and stuff. And then I'd make a rough mix of it. We'd take it in the car and we'd drive around for a day or so, or the rest of the day or whatever, and just listen to it and kind of get an idea of what we could change and what we needed to tweak on it. And then we'd go back in and we'd record the song that way. So that's pretty much how all the songs would get done, except there were a few songs that Dime would kind of rough out in his closet, which was like a little 8-track studio in his house. Late at night or whatever, he would rough out some rough idea, and then we'd record that. But yeah.
Would you say that's why there's probably not a ton of extra bonus songs over the years? Because even when they did the reissue of Vulgar, they only had one song that they didn't put on the original pressing. And
yeah, and I'd forgotten that song was even around. That was but yeah, their feeling was they didn't want to release any extra songs than what was going to go on the record. And I was trying to get them to do, hey, there's soundtrack stuff, we could do stuff, we could sell some of these songs to like a movie or whatever. Right. They wanted 10 songs and because that's what you get paid for, is 10 songs on a record. You don't get publishing for anything more, so why make more? And anyway, so that's what they always just did, exactly the same amount of songs that they were going to record.
And Vulgar being such a legendary album, I wonder how many bands that you got to work with just because of that one album. They're like, we got to get Terry Date because we love Vulgar Display of Power. I mean, your bank account probably looks much better, having done that album.
Well, yeah, absolutely, yeah, and that's the way it works for everybody who does what we do. I mean, you get one thing that people like, and other people want to do the same thing. I can't tell you how many bands I've worked with that wanted me to get Dimebag's sound.
Yeah.
Make me sound like Dimebag. And I'd have to say, well, you're going to have Dimebag come in and play then, because I can give you his guitar, his rig, everything exactly, but it's his hands and his head, and his heart. Those are the things that made him special. And so people wanted a little bit of that sound and that magic. And, I would always, for me, when somebody asked me that, I always encourage them, I want my next band to ask for your sound.
Right.
So let's work on that. And, so that's where we usually go from that.
And the one thing that I always say about Rex's playing is Rex is very underrated in the band. When Dime goes off to do a solo, I mean, Rex is holding it down, under whatever Dime is doing. So what was it like kind of recording with Rex and just kind of how unsung he is as a bass player.
Rex, I think Rex is the best bass player, especially in the heavy in metal, of anybody I've worked with by far. I mean, he had the best tone, he had the best hands. I mean, he knew when to lay back, and he knew when to step up. His sensitivity was better than anybody I've worked with as far as bass player goes. And I mean, his tone, and it still is amazing. And when I hear him, I think I did some stuff with him not too long ago. Well, it's a little while ago, but his bass playing is just, his tone is so good. Cuts through everything. It's heavy. Anyway, I can't say enough good things about him and what he meant to that whole project, all those projects, and how good of a bass player he is.
So they go off. Vulgar Display of Power is obviously a big success, and then they come back for Far Beyond Driven. What are your memories of doing Far Beyond Driven?
Well, I do remember the main conversation was, we have to be heavier than Vulgar. That was the goal going into it, was to be heavier, take it another notch up. That particular record, Vinny and Dime's dad had moved the studio from Arlington to Nashville before that record was made. So we went up to Nashville to where the dad's studio was, which was basically in the garage of his house. And so we did all the writing and the basic tracks for the most part there. We all stayed in a big high-rise Holiday Inn or something, in Nashville. I think, I don't know what point of the record, but about halfway through, I think we still had guitars, we still had vocals to do. There was a falling out, or the guys were ready to get out of Nashville and go back to Dallas. So we went to Dallas Sound Labs, which is where we met Sterling Winfield, let's see, and Tim. But anyway, we went to Dallas Sound Labs, and we did the rest of the record there, mixed it and everything. I think we mixed it at that studio. So they were back in Texas, where they were more comfortable, staying in their own house, eating at their own restaurants where they wanted to go. And we definitely, there's video of they had a pool table, they had a lounge in that studio, which was really kind of hard on me, because the guys were wanting to play pool and not work sometimes, so I had to keep things moving forward. Which is when I got the nickname Richard, I think, right around that same time. So and Rex gave me one, hook back. Yeah, that's right, because I tend to hunch over at the board.
No,
anyway, so those are the things I remember from that one. We just the band wanted to be heavier, harder, more than Vulgar. And it took me a while to really understand that I think they might have done it, on that record. So, Vulgar was so, was such a new thing, it was so heavy and so groove oriented. It was so good when it came out that it's hard to take a notch up, but they did, I think.
So one track off of one track off of Far Beyond Driven I want to talk about is Becoming, and there's that drum pattern. When Vinny comes to you and says, like, check this out, what are you thinking when you hear that?
I was actually, I have a Polaroid, and there's other pictures I've seen of Vinny and Dime working that riff out. And Vinny's at his drums, Dime is like standing right behind him. I'm recording the whole thing. Dime had just gotten that whammy pedal, that Detect, octave pedal. so he started playing that riff, you know, that one. And then I heard Vinny's kick drum, his feet, and I'm going, what in the fuck is he doing? You know, and I had to go out and I said, play that. What are you doing? He goes, oh, this is easy. Just this foot does this and this foot does this, you know. It was the coolest little gallopy kick pattern that I'd ever heard. And for him, it was just like, you know, what's the big deal?
Must be nice to be that talented.
Oh, I know. And the two of them together, I mean, there was probably from maybe Vulgar, but definitely Far Beyond Driven on, when it came time to do Dime solos, I would usually just like let Vinny sit and do all the punch-ins, let Vinny and Dime work together. I'd get the sound up, the mix going, and then I'd just kind of sit to the back of the room because those two had a communication that didn't require words, you know.
Right.
The way we would do lead guitars is we would take 3 tracks on the tape and he would play 3 solos. And if he was happy with all 3, we would take those and we would comp the best pieces out of that. We'd just take chunks.
Yeah.
So because Vinny and Dime grew up listening to the same stuff, you know, Dime would do a lead, Vinny would look up at him and go, do that Randy Rhoads part instead, you know. And so there's no way I'm going to get a better performance out of Dime, you know, than that, you know, just, you know, so that's where I just would say, I'm right here, but you guys just go, you know. And it really made a big difference. That the way those two brothers were tighter than any 2 brothers I'd ever seen. So
I'm assuming it was just a constant mind blow seeing him play guitar live and in person right there, one-on-one, you two in a room kind of thing.
You know, it is and it isn't. When you're in the moment, you don't think about it as much. You know the guy's good and everything is like really supernatural, but I mean, he would struggle. There were songs that we had to work really. Walk took us all day to do the guitar part on that, because we did the first guitar, then we did a double, and then we did a triple up the middle. But because of that riff, you know, every attack and every palm mute on the 2 doubles and the triple, they had to be exactly on. There couldn't be any of this. They had to be like this. And when you listen to that song, in headphones especially, when you listen to that song, they're so close that they almost phase each other a little bit. And sometimes the palm mute sounds like it's coming behind your head, you know, and there's no fancy manipulation. That was just hard work. When we went to mastering on that record, I think it was with Howie in New York. Howie finished, you know, getting it all EQ'd, and back then it was everything was going to vinyl. So when you cut the vinyl, you have to cut it side A all in one run, you know, and then you put on side B and cut that all in one run. There's no stopping. It just is like a continuous play.
Okay.
So when Howie was ready to do that, he would bring us all, we'd all come in, and you know, you sit in front of him, and then you just sit down and he just turns it up, and he just does his thing. He cuts that side A onto a lacquer. I wasn't in there for that because I'd been in there for the, you know, helping, or supposedly helping. I've been in there with Howie when we were trying to get it figured out. But they played the whole side A and side B, and when it was over, Dime comes out and he's crying, just like tears coming down. I'm going, what's the matter, man? And he said, you know, that thing was so much work. That was so hard to do that record, but it was so worth it. You know, he was so happy with it, you know, and that's that passion. He was so emotional that way. So
yeah, he definitely lived the music. So he's one of those people that, you know, you just believed everything that was coming out of his hands was from every part of his body. There was never a note that he didn't believe in.
That's true. And I mean, he had good pitch. He could tell, he would bend his notes exactly right. I always felt like that guitar was another appendage to him. It just was so natural on him. And it used to frustrate him because, again, I'm not a musician. So sometimes when we were doing these things, I'd get, I wasn't keeping up with him, and he'd get frustrated. And finally he said, okay, after we're done tonight, I'm going to teach you how to play guitar. And I said, okay. So we sat down the first night. He tried to teach me Johnny Be Good or something. 10 minutes later, he goes, oh, fuck it. And we left.
Drinks.
So anyway, it was so natural with him. Yeah.
So good. So Far Beyond Driven comes together and becomes a #1 album. How insane is that for a band as heavy as Pantera to come out #1?
It was, again, it was, I think we were I'm sure I was very happy at the time. But if things were going, there was so much coming out at the time. It's so much happening that, I wasn't part of any celebration with them because they probably did it somewhere else, and I was in a studio somewhere else, and we would talk about it. We were happy, of course, but there was, just so much going on. They were on world tours. They were dealing with all the mayhem that goes along with being the kind of band that they were, and I was in a studio with somebody else. So it was a really nice notation, but again, a lot of those things become more important as I get farther away from them.
True. All right. So they go back, they come back to you for the Great Southern Trendkill. And I've always said that, from Cowboys to Vulgar to Far Beyond Driven to Great Southern Trendkill, just continue to get heavier and heavier. What are your memories of the Great Southern Trendkill coming together?
Well, that one, we built a studio in Dimebag's garage out behind his house. It was he had bought a house in Arlington. There was like a big kind of there's a RV garage basically, so it was really high ceilings. We built a little control room there, a little recording area, stocked it with some gear. They'd bought a board like their dad's board because they liked it. And they were going to record it all onto little ADAT digital tapes. And I said, I'm not going to make a record onto ADAT tapes. I said, we need to get a tape deck in here and whatever. So we got a tape deck in, and then we started testing it out to record. And there was just this horrendous low end everywhere, on all the tracks. What the fuck? Couldn't figure it out. Finally, we ended up moving the tape deck out into the recording room and running cables to it because that was the only place where it wouldn't make all kinds of noise. And bear in mind, me and Aaron, their sound guy, we were building the studio ourselves, so this is totally like do it yourself. Anyway, we couldn't figure out what the hell was going on with that whole thing. And then Dime walks in and he goes, gee, I wonder if it's that 50,000 kilowatt power line that's buried underneath the house. It's running underneath the control room. So there was a main power line that was underground right underneath there. So that's what was doing it. But making the record, we had our tape deck out in the live room. As you know, probably, they drank a lot of Coors Light. And so a lot. I mean, cases and cases every day. So out in the main room, everybody's out there recording, drink a Coors Light, and then you just toss it. And I go out there after a while and I look at the tape deck and there's Coors Light cans all over the tapes. They had been landing on the tape deck while the tape was recording or was rolling, the whole thing. So I had to build a case around the tape deck so the Coors Light cans wouldn't hit the tape deck. So that was one of my memories from that record. That was also the first record I had my assistant Ulrich Wild on. He had never experienced anything like that in his life before. He got a nickname. I think it was called Heimlich Maneuver. And let's see, also on that one, Phil had moved back to New Orleans. So he was kind of flying in when the band would have some songs kind of worked out. Phil would fly in and they would tweak them, fix them up. And then when it came time for vocals, I left Ulrich in Dallas to continue working with Vinny and Dime on guitar stuff. And then I went to Trent Reznor's studio at the time, and in New Orleans. And then I had a rough mix of all the songs. I put that onto 2 tracks on the tape, and then Phil did all his vocals to that. And then I brought that back and I synced it up to the main tape. So anyway, that was, I think it probably took 2 weeks to do the vocals on that one. We did them all in the control room. It was a huge control room. I mean, Phil was probably 20 feet behind me at least, and he had floor wedges like live. So he had plenty of space, and we had good communication. But yeah, he'd come in at 7 o'clock every night, work for 2 hours, have a song done. He did that every night until the record was done. So then I flew back to Dallas and played it for everybody, because this is in the days before, you couldn't throw stuff over the internet. You had to get on a plane with the tape. So and then I can't remember much after that, other than, I tried to mix it there at Dime's place. I couldn't do it. I finally had to tell him I got to take this to LA where I'm, place where I'm comfortable, because I can't do it here. They were disappointed, but they understood.
And that's the time, obviously, when Phil and the rest of the band is kind of internally struggling. Is that something that, you're with the band for the entire career? Is that something that you see, and does that type of stuff bum you out when you see bands kind of starting to drift apart?
Yeah, I guess I don't pay attention to it, because the way I look at it and the way I talk to them is, you don't have time for this bullshit, figure it out.
Yeah.
And it's not that big a deal in whatever. I didn't let it bother me. I could tell that Vinny and Dime wanted to go to New Orleans when the vocals were going down. They wanted to be involved with it, because they had opinions about the vocals too. But Phil didn't. I didn't know this, but Phil must not have wanted them. He wanted to do it himself at that point. So yeah, he was having troubles at that time. But he kept that all from me, because I'm more like a dad. I'm more like, they kept all that. They kept it from me. So I didn't know Phil was having the problems he was having.
I know it's obviously way more commonplace now for people to do, their bass at this one place and their guitars here. But at the time, Phil doing vocals away from the band in an entirely different state. I mean, was that something common, or was that like trying to figure out how we're going to do this and kind of learning on the fly?
Well, a little bit of learning on the fly for me, because I had to figure out technically how to make it work. Typically with Pantera, we would only use one reel of tape. Usually get 3 songs on one reel. In other words, 24 tracks.
Yeah.
I wouldn't make multiple reel. I'd keep it at 24 tracks. So I had to make sure I had a tape with I don't even remember how I did it now, but probably had a tape with a rough mix on a couple of tracks, and then I put the vocals in, and then I synced the vocals up somehow. I can't remember how I did it now. I'd have to look at the tracks again to figure it out. But yeah, it was as far as just physically doing it without the band there. When a band's on their 4th record, that's not that unusual. They want space to do it. You know, sometimes when a band is 4 or 5 records in, they don't even want me around. You know, the singer, you know, knows how to do it. He knows how to record himself. Chris Cornell used to do that, not with me, but after me.
Yeah.
He would just take his stuff and record his stuff at home by himself. So anyway, it was Phil and I always got along really well. So I had a blast when I was down there working. I mean,
I bet.
had a good time with him. So,
and just kind of, you know, once again, you know, you go into the to do the remix and remasters of the latest album. So I mean, you kind of get your hands on all of the albums, and you know, you're a part of the entire legacy of the band now and the career of the band. And just kind of looking back over your time with Pantera and the band itself, you know, obviously we're 20 plus years away now from the band. And, you know, what are your thoughts on the band now, you know, now that you can, hindsight being 2020, I guess?
Well, you know, nothing that I say isn't, you know, is going to be anything that you don't know already, you know, and they're the best band in that genre, I think, you know, as far as the groove metal. And Dime is, you know, he's the best guitar player of that genre. It's hard to deny that. Vinny, incredibly underrated drummer, you know, I think he should be on the same level as Dime is on guitar. Rex should be on the same level on bass. Phil should be on the same level on vocals. I mean, those guys, you have 4 guys that are all the top guys in their on their instrument. That's pretty hard to beat.
Absolutely. But as we wrap this up, I do want to sneak in a Deftones question on you. Sure. We just passed the 20th anniversary of White Pony, so I'd be an idiot not to ask you about that, because it's, you know, there were probably millions and millions of babies conceived to that record.
Well, I hope they're good ones.
What are your memories of doing that with Chino and the guys?
Well, that was, you know, again, those guys are like family to me. You know, I just, you know, I talk to those guys still, I don't know, 2-3 times a month, maybe more. When we were doing the record here in the last year, you know, we spent a lot of time together. But that record, every record with those guys is special because they're family, you know. I don't know if you can see, but over in the corner, see if I can do this. It's all backwards, right? There, that second picture. That's my daughter when she was 1.5 years old. Yeah, maybe 2 years old, sitting behind Abe's drums during the White Pony sessions.
Oh, that's amazing.
So my daughters, you know, they grew up with the Deftones guys. They had nicknames for them. I still talk to, you know, they're still just like family. So making that record was kind of, the band was sort of fighting a lot during that record. You know, that was their 3rd record, I believe.
Yeah.
And that's usually the time when, you know, we've been on the road together a lot, you know, a lot of external pressures going on, you know, maybe drugs involved, you know, all the things that contribute to anxiety. And then you throw everybody into a heavily creative situation where you're trying to outdo your last really creative situation. Anyway, there was a lot of arguing, but with those guys, it was like brothers arguing. You know, it would get elevated and heated, but they would always hug afterwards. So making that record was a special record. You know, we did that in San Francisco. At actually, it was Metallica's studio where they did a lot of their stuff. The plant. And I'd actually done another record there maybe 10 years earlier, Mother Love Bone.
Oh, nice.
That was the first record I did in that place. So that's kind of why I brought Deftones there, because I liked the place. So anyway, special record, you know.
Oh
And
yeah.
every record I do with those guys, it's special. They're just, you know, Chino lives a 3-hour drive away from me right now, you know, so it was easy for him to come up to my studio here, and we did second half of the record here, mixed it, everything. And you know, the rest of the guys aren't too far away either, so I talk to them or see them all the time.
Fantastic. And congratulations on Ohms. I mean, that's pretty much been on tons of people's top records of 2020. So, Ohms definitely knocked it out the park.
I just wish, and we all do, that those guys could have gone out and played those songs live, you know, and they will eventually, I know, but this is the first time. It's really weird to put all that time into a record and then just put it out. Right. Without any kind of support, no live touring, nothing, so the fans can see the band play the songs live. It's really tough, but it was a good record. And if I'll swing around here, there's my progress board for that record still up on the wall back there. That's
yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. So anyway.
Well, Terry Date, man, it's when you start a Pantera podcast, there's a handful of people on the bucket list, and to get you crossed off so early in this thing, it's pretty amazing, Terry. Thanks for taking the time.
Well, thanks for doing it. I mean, it's so nice that people really appreciate all those bands, but Pantera especially, you know, that was a special one.